Hello, hello, hello. I want to make a video now and I want to talk about two stories that I watched yesterday on YouTube. And I watched some stuff uh, that gets my mind a little bit off my chocolate addiction and my loneliness. My chat room addiction. So it helps, and it also is educational, of course. Crime reports are very interesting to me because I've always been interested in psychology, forensic psychology in particular. I'm really after these questions. I want to know more about what's going on inside of these brains. These people, they will not reveal their motives, and so that makes you really wonder what's going on. And then I hear some people say they're just simply bad, or they're just simply sadistic, and they just simply enjoy doing it, and this kind of characteristic has prevailed in evolution, and that's why these people are like this. But I accept that, but it's still not enough for me. It's not enough. It doesn't dig in far enough. I mean, you can still say, like you say a little child. Let's take my own example. I was 5 years old. I pulled out a big butcher knife out of the drawer in the kitchen. I went in the living room and I threatened to stab my mother with that butcher knife. Okay. So I didn't hurt her, I didn't do anything, but I was so angry at her that I was standing there like this. Kind of like those horror movies in the past of this. There's one horror movie. Boy, that really reminded me of myself when I was five. Of a little dwarf in a red cape that ended up in the water, and that's exactly what happened to me. I had a red raincoat on. I ended up in the water, and my mother waited for a very long time before she finally fished me out of the water, and I almost drowned. I mean, but at least she got me out of the water and all of this. But I don't know what it is with my mother. I don't really understand. But yeah, I'm kind of like I'm a little bit like a like one of those horror movie themes, reminds me a lot. This is all energy, has to do with trauma that's not processed, obviously. I want to get to the core of this in this video. Unprocessed trauma, childhood despair, feeling unloved, feeling abandoned by the parents. It's the worst thing there is. Nothing is as bad as that. That's the absolute worst thing that can happen to any living being, to be abandoned by the mother. The worst. I'm not exaggerating. So then there's an accumulated energy of abandonment, and that energy can then be locked up. It can be suppressed by the consciousness, depending on what other emotions are coming up in this context. If there's shame coming up, shame will definitely suppress something all the way to the bottom. Shame suppresses a genuine feeling from the past, a trauma or something, so far that the person doesn't even remember it. There's an amnesia happening. There's an anosognosia happening. There were the main consciousness is not even, has no clue at all anymore. There's a total disconnect to the past. And that usually happens out of shame, stigmatization from society, where everyone does the same thing. It snowballs into a mass anosognosia, into some kind of mass social type of stigmatization and threat from other people. Thou shall not be whatever, coveting her husband, or be jealous, or want, or have envy, or whatever. And then those feelings, naturally, they get completely compressed down and severed and disconnected from consciousness, and the ego will make sure it stays down, and it never gets processed. So, and then eventually it comes out in extremely inappropriate situation and so on, or in through whatever, when the person feels cornered in some situation, and then suddenly the person who thought she was the most unneurotic, my mother in parenthesis, okay, will suddenly kick out with hands and feet, like an injured animal in the corner, okay, and say, then, I mean, unbelievable stuff comes out then, like total, like, then just do what you want. Then Peter can, my dad, Peter can marry Barbara, and then just I will just commit suicide, and then that will come out there, in under a pressure moment, right? So, but before that, it's so tucked down. But in a moment like this, it will come out like some kind of geyser suddenly. Under pressure, it gets popped out like a pimple, sort of. But only under that, in this pressure situation. So, and then you wonder, oh, that person who claims to be so normal suddenly isn't so normal after all, right? It pisses me off. That's why I react to it like this. But yeah, it is what it is. I need to look at all of these people, including my mother, from the sky perspective, and I need to, and that's the psychologist inside of me, because I do want to understand people. I don't want to judge anyone from the earth plane, sitting here on the chair perspective. So I don't want to judge anyone from my own neurotic perspective and all of this. So I want to understand people better from the sky perspective, from Google Earth. I want to look at the whole picture. I want to understand where people are coming from, where they're standing, why they are where they are, okay, what led up to it, what kind of emotions led up to it. And I know that forensic psychologists and anyone working for law enforcement, I think the people that are doing crime investigations, they are very interested in psychology, because that, obviously, the more they learn that, the more it helps them to better communicate with criminals and understand what's actually going on and what actually happened. So I'm going to start with this one, with the first story that I want to start with. This is also what I watched first, and then the other one was the older lady. I watched that before I turned the computer off, and that was John Allen's story. And that wasn't a very long story, but very interesting and very paranormal. So the first one is not paranormal. The first one is from 48 hours crime investigations on YouTube. That's also a very interesting channel. And they talk about all kinds of cases, also past cases, and so on. And I think it's very, very interesting. They get into the details of it, also the communication between the people. There's one other channel that I like very much, where they also where they go into the depths of forensic investigation. So to pay attention to body language. I forgot now which channel name that was. So I think it's forensic investigation or something like that. That's very good. I watched those too. But the first one is that's the 48 hours crime investigation, and it was somewhere, I think it was somewhere in the 80s. There was this lady that everyone loved. She was in her 40s, very pretty lady, very kind. She would do a whole lot for everyone, very, very, very generous and loving. It's usually those type of women that end up being battered or murdered. Okay, so and I'll get into the reason why that is. So so that shouldn't be a deterrent for us to be kind, obviously, and also we can't help who we are. We are who we are. If we are kind-hearted and generous, then that's a wonderful thing. That's a virtue. It's good to have. It makes the world a better place. And at least before we at some point get battered or shot or murdered or whatever or assassinated, we can do some good for the world. And that's very nice. So what happened was, and I'm getting into the nitty gritty of this. I'm getting into my own psychological investigation into this. Last night, I was like, for a long time, I was talking to my computer, to the haters, and I said, why would a psychopath do this to an innocent woman like that who's just nice? He knew her for 2 years. He was a contractor. He worked for her and her mother. A 26-year-old guy who had everything going for himself. He had a girlfriend. He had a good contractor job. I don't know if he was working for someone else or had his own contractor business, but he was working for these people. He's even doing a good job, and they were becoming friendly with him, and they accepted him as a good friend, and everything seemed on the outside to work fairly well. For someone like me, if I see that face of that guy, I already see much, much deeper into the psychology. If I see that face, and I've seen this face, they've shown his face in different photos, in different situations, this face is very troubled. Very, very, very troubled man. Okay. And one can clearly see this. And that's a man who is hiding something inside of him. That's a man who has trauma and suppresses the trauma at the same time. This is bad. This is really, really, really bad. Because then the pressure cooker at some point can't hold it together anymore. Okay, so just like with Elliot Rodger or many other people that live in this, that have shame, and they suppress their feelings out of shame, and at some point it can't hold it anymore. The tension gets so bad, and they explode. So, and the whole reason why he even wanted to work for them or introduced himself to them and I don't know exactly how that got all started, how he got in contact with them. That's some they were in some kind of rural community, I guess, where a lot of people know each other. But I assumed that he had already kind of zoomed in on her before he even worked for them. He saw her, well, I don't know where he saw her. He may have seen her in a whatever, in a religious situation, some kind of religious church or something, or some kind of other event where and he fixated on her and he wanted her. Okay. And I can tell just by looking at his face that he kind of short guy, he did not feel very attractive. He didn't think he was attractive. He didn't think he was a match for her intellectually. She was working as the right hand for a clothing manufacturer and a small clothing manufacturer business where they were all really, really close and friends and they were working together as a great team. And she dedicated, very dedicated to that. And so he probably thought she was too high up off a grape hanging, so for him to get to it, when that's that old saying, if the grape hangs too high, people will say, oh, they must be sour, as the cop out excuse. But in his case, he didn't say that. He pursued that fruit, right? But he at the same time he thought he wasn't a match for her. He thought that she was way too pretty or popular or intelligent or established or way too yuppie or whatever he may have thought, way too good of a, or maybe too kind, just too kind, because he knew he wasn't kind. He knew that he didn't have much compassion and empathy. So that also presses down on people's self-esteem. And that's definitely genetic. All of these things come together here. But I still believe that people can heal. I still believe it because I want to believe it. I want to. But I'm going to be careful. I personally, I've said it many, many times. When I see a face like this, I have to stay away from a person with that facial expression because I know that's a landmine that can explode at any point. Okay, so we have to be careful, of course. But those are cluster Bs that definitely need to go into cluster B center and they need to get help there before they explode. Okay, where they feel safe to talk about what they feel. They feel safe for the first time. Okay. And I tell you what, this incel community and all of that hype about men walking their own ways, first of all, they are not walking their own ways. That's just some temper tantrum. That's like, damn, I don't want you then. No, but they still, the feeling isn't going away, right? They still want the women. And they don't just want a hooker, or they don't just want a one night stand. What they really want is real closeness, real unity. Okay, that's what every man wants. That's what every woman wants. Okay, people may say, "Oh no, I don't want to. I don't want to get into a close relationship anymore. I've had it." That's just That's a defense mechanism. Okay, so and then the Insta community, that MACTOW community, that's like a collective defense mechanism. That's what it is. And then they talk each other further and further into a rage. That Owen Cook is trying to counteract that, and trying to help men to get to the core of what they feel, and to more feel more balanced, and have a better attitude towards women, so that they can actually go out and introduce themselves to a woman without doing that in some kind of snappy way. So he's really helping a lot of men, that Owen Cook. And that's going in the right direction. Teal Swan is helping a lot of people. Okay, I dreamed about her last night. And so there's a handful of people that are helping people to resolve these emotional problems. I know it is possible to do it. I know it's possible. But when the majority of society, particularly that's happening on social media, the vast majority of people are in a defense mechanism. They are suppressing their emotions. They are showing a facade of bully, and that may also be genetic, but that that is an act out, that this, and the tendency to act out to deal with the problem in this way is genetic. But the actual, that's not the end all of their personality. Okay, that's not who they have to be. Okay? They don't have to be a bully. If they heal, if they recognize the importance of healing, then they see that they don't need to be a bully. Okay, it's just it's a masquerade to be a bully. Okay, it's, or whatever they're acting out with, greed or selfishness or violence or whatever it is, so it's a totally dysfunctional masquerade, that just that is an ego function, and that doesn't serve their bodies and their brains and their souls. So we are a unit of body, brain, and soul. Okay, and the ego is our defense mechanism. The ego is a fight or flight reaction, and it can escalate. It can take on a life on its own. And when that happens, this ego energy, which is also one with their ether energy, with their soul, that ego energy is this. You are your ego in that moment. You are your anger in that moment. So that the soul, I've been thinking about this for many, many, many years. So this is just my personal conclusion that I came to. When the ego energy escalates, that is your soul, that is with that is this energy that has this it's kind of like a sickness of the soul. So but the soul can heal. Every single soul can heal. Okay, we can heal all souls. It is possible. I know it is possible. I want to believe it, but I also know it is possible. It is, of course it's possible. People have done it. Often people had to experience something very harsh before they came to that realization. Very harsh situation, where it wasn't just the punishment of that situation that kind of made them like, okay, I'm going to straighten up now, but it was the punishment of the situation that left people in a very dire situation, either crippled, paralyzed, or in solitary, some kind of cage or solitary confinement, where they were forced to reflect on this. They were forced to look into themselves. They had no other choice. And they also had time to look into themselves. They were not given the opportunity to act out in any way. There was no alcohol, there was no excess food, there was no, like, times of war, famines lead people into something like this, where people start to have insights into themselves and into society and into what led up to the war. And they will say, I'm going to teach my children that we don't want to act like this anymore, supporting a dictator like Adolf Hitler. And so that generation probably is more vigilant, right? Like, people in their 80s and 90s, like my parents, are more vigilant about stuff. And they might recognize, if the truth is told to the public. But in Germany, the truth is absolutely, completely concealed. I mean, so far concealed that my brother and a good friend of mine, they won't even talk to me. No, they won't talk to me because I stand outside of that propaganda narrative that they have been told in Germany. Okay, Germany, the news in Germany are completely biased by the left agenda, by the woke shit agenda, and it made me really wonder, why do they want to bring all these refugees in? Don't they realize that at some point Germany is going to collapse, right? What's happening in their brains? What's going on? What leads Angela Merkel to make excuses and bring in more and more and more refugees? Okay, or whoever they have now in charge. I have not paid any attention to what's going on. I think they got someone new, but same thing, same exactly. It wouldn't matter who they get. It will be someone who is on the, I guess, the corporate agenda. The corporate agenda puts these people in, and to the outside world, they make it sound sort of cozy or something to the majority of people, and they make it sound like this is ethical or something, when it really isn't. And that's why they're very careful in what they tell the public in the news media in Germany or whole Europe, I would say. They're very careful to make sure the public doesn't get the whole big picture of it. So, but then, it fizzles out all of this, the vigilance with the next generations, and they don't understand anymore what led up to Adolf Hitler or dictatorship or whatever dictatorship in Asia and so on. Lots of dictatorships in the world, not just Adolf Hitler. Obviously, there was a dictatorship in Italy at that time as well. So what's going on over, but they're always singling out Adolf Hitler. That's Adolf Hitler has become the ultimate scapegoat. Let's just pawn it all on him. That's he's our he's our he's the ultimate trash can that we can dump it all into. But the truth of the story is way more nuanced and way more complicated than anyone can possibly imagine. Okay, so Adolf Hitler was not just a bad person. Matter of fact is, he was not even a cluster B. Okay, he was psychotic. He was not well, and things really spiraled out of control. But it wouldn't matter who the dictator. You can take Mother Teresa, make her a dictator, and things will spiral out of control. I guarantee this to you. It wouldn't matter who the dictator. The dictator in the end doesn't even have anything to say anymore. because this agenda around that dictator that is composed of thousands of people that are all on the take, or they all want to whatever. They want to gain power, they want to have this higher leverage and so on. And then because of that, yeah, all these people around that person will then kind of like put that person into some kind of mute situation, and they will start to basically dictate to the dictator what is being dictated to the wider public. So we've seen this all over in history worldwide, okay? And it spirals out of control. Albert Einstein said, if you see a crime happening and you look the other way, you make yourself equally responsible for the crime taking place. If you don't intercept and help that victim, rescue the victim, you make yourself equally responsible for the crime happening. And Albert Einstein said that in the context of the Holocaust. Okay. So great mind, great soul, and we should listen to him. Okay. And it's happening again, this time in disguise. The dictator or dictators. It could be a handful or it could be 100 that are working in cahoots, right? And they can be dressed up in a completely different outfit with a totally different ethnic background and different ideology and so on, but the same exact mechanism happening again. Okay. And people are not paying attention, they cater into it, and then it escalates and spirals out of control. Okay? And that's the corporate agenda knows that it works that way. They know how the public works. They know how easily people jump on a bandwagon and accept that, right? It's incredible. I don't want to get too far into the subject now. I want to stick with that story. I always fan out. So anyway, that 40 something year old lady, very, very, very nice lady. Always, she was always nice to that contractor who was 26, and he obviously had a fixation on her. He had an obsession with her, and he thought he could never have her. He felt unempowered. He felt ugly. He felt unattractive. He felt like he was not going to be a match. He thought for sure she's going to turn him down if he kisses her or comes onto her, whatever. And I saw another story that was like this. That lady also survived. That's a completely unrelated story, but exactly the same theme. Okay. And that man, I would have seen it too. That man's facial expression, I would have seen it too. As this exact same facial expression of hatred and feeling unempowered, and blaming the other people for never owning up to, never introspecting, always blaming the other people, and that leads to complete disaster for those people. It's just that's just a landmine situation. Okay, that landmine, that explosive bomb, can just anything can set that into exploding, and it's really horrible. And I can clearly see this. So, but he never admitted it to them. How he never admitted to her how he feels, because the fear of being rejected by her way outweighed this the ultimate goal that he had of getting to spend time with her, becoming a friend. So And that's why also a lot of men, they don't they don't want to be just friends. That's They would feel defeated if they were just friends. I had a boyfriend in Germany who I was just friends with for several years, but he never gave up. He was always catering to me, and at some point, I fell for him. So, and that was my second longest relationship that I ever had. That was that boyfriend Norbert. He was schizophrenic, but I mean, it's not. He didn't act like this because he was schizophrenic. He acted like this because he wasn't. He was not. He didn't have that shame type of mechanism. Or he wasn't cluster B. He's cluster A, which is schizoid personality. They don't have the shame thing. The cluster B are the ones that have this enormous shame and the fear of shame. The act out is pride. Pride is there that it's an extreme counter reaction, counterbalancing act to by the ego thinking pride would then, or like self-aggrandization, putting themselves on a pedestal, calling themselves kings and boss and all of that, or calling themselves whatever, like God. I've seen it all. Okay, I'm not judging you. I see the mechanism of it. It is a counter reaction to feeling incredibly unempowered, to feeling beaten down, and they don't want to feel that way. Okay, they have been beaten down by their dads, by their society that they grew up in, by their religion. Okay, you are a victim of Islam. Okay? It's the truth. I told Danny last night. You are a victim of that religion. That religion has done you in psychologically, completely. And you don't even recognize it. You don't see the danger of this mechanism. That's sad. Okay? You should see it. You should be willing to see it. So, and it's very important to have these insights into our own psychology. There's that nice lady that I talked to the other day. She's she's a sweetheart. Uh-huh. Sherry, so sweet. Uh-huh. So yeah, we need to look into our own minds. We have no other choice. We have no other choice. I have to do it as well. I have no other choice. And it's painful and all of this, but sometimes it feels like this is the end or whatever. I'm going to hold on to the euthanasia clinic. It can feel like this. It felt like this to me yesterday in the garage. I sat there. I said, Paul, I can't continue. I have to go to hold on to the euthanasia clinic. I have gotten to this point so many times. I can't count it anymore. But this is my chance. That's my entry point into the ego dissolution funnel right there. That if I accept that, if I surrender myself to that feeling, and I'm beyond shame and pride, completely beyond. Okay, I'm beyond anyone judging or laughing or whatever. I'm I'm completely alone with that pain, and there's no more act out, and I know there's no act out possible. My brain knows that, and I have to go into it. And then I go in the backyard and I say to the whole neighborhood that I am sick and tired of the lies in the world. I go in the garage, I sit on my chair, and I howl like an injured wild animal, pitifully. Okay, pitifully. And that's the core of that's the inwardness meditation process. You howl your way all the way through. You come out the other end of the tunnel. You got insights, you got clarity, you got calmness. You can see the whole picture from above. And that's the only way to do it. And I am hoping that we can create the therapy centers. I want to create the therapy centers to give everyone the chance to go into those feelings and feel them all the way through and heal. Okay, that's what I'm wishing for, really deeply. But to get that set up, I mean, that is an endeavor to get that something like that started. I mean, the corporate agenda does not want that to happen. They don't want people to heal because then they can't control you anymore. Islam can't control you anymore if you're healing yourself. Okay, you see what I'm talking about? Or the Christian religion or Mormon religion or whatever religion. They can't control you anymore. You will be outside of that. You have an insight. You will see yourself as a natural person that you are. Okay. Tag free. Okay. You are not tagged. You are not caged. You are you, the natural you. The inner child is the natural you. Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you what enormous freedom that is to make artwork and not care at all. Not at all what anyone thinks or says about it. You can take packaging materials, you can dump paint on it, you can slur this around, you can put toys on it, you can, like Elita Andre from Australia, like total freedom. By the way, Elita Andre is the reincarnation of Jackson Pollock. She's a young woman now. Okay, I saw her grow up on YouTube. That was pure joy watching her. Her parents are both artists, and they just gave her this total freedom, and that's good parenting. That's being the right mentors for the child. That's making the environment safe. Okay? I had a dad like this. Okay? My mother, she wasn't shaming me for my artwork or my stuff, but she was always looking at my artwork as a psychogram, as something that was critical, that as something that was a sign of unwellness. But it really, when you pack it out, that's the sign of wellness. Whatever you do, if you create a doll and you hang it up on the wall and you make a shrine underneath, okay, then that is your expression. This is how you feel. Okay? I painted myself as an Indian girl on a cross being crucified. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his last years, signed his letters as der Gekreuzigte, which means the crucified one. So it's that same energetic pattern. Okay. So it wants to come out, it wants to express itself. Whatever we feel, we want to express ourselves. Okay. And it's important whether that looks neurotic to other people or not, doesn't matter. My dad was always on board. He said, good, continue, do it. So that was very helpful for me, actually. Can you imagine if I had grown up with my grandfather, then he would have bullied me and shamed me for my artwork. So, and that would have put an extra burden and pressure on me. And I see that's happening with most people, most households in the world. Okay, where the adults are shaming their children for being their inner child, for being their child that they are supposed to be at age 3 or 4 or whatever. And they want to put them, they want to stomp them into a template of allowed behavior, which is not who they really are. Okay? Every child wants to play. Every child wants to express herself or himself with all kinds of things, with toys, with artwork, with paint. That should be allowed. That should be, thank you, Blue God, 4, 4, 4, 4. Yes. The animal angels, which are regular angels, of course. I always say animal angels because four, standing on four legs, but we come in many different shapes. We reincarnate in many different shapes. We reincarnate into four legs and two legs and this and that and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so, oh yeah, I saw really amazing photo of the Orion Nebula. I posted it on Facebook, and what I saw in there, and that's what people call heaven. Okay, so where a lot of people go to after some people go to another nebula, some people go to another galaxy, right? It's not just the Orion Nebula. Heaven is endless, okay, but it's just that I feel this feeling very strongly many years ago when I first heard about the Orion Nebula, and I saw it in science documentary films. I had this feeling, this is where I'm coming from. I've been there. So, like in between lives, I've been there, I've hung out there at the Orion Nebula in heaven. Okay? So, and I see this particular photo. It shifts also, depending which telescope zooms in on it and so on. What depending on, I mean, it's churning and churning and moving all the time. It's in constant flux. But what this particular photo from the telescope captured in the Orion Nebula, this photo almost had exactly the same energetic quality as the painting by Raphael, The Transfiguration of Christ. This is not a coincidence. Raphael was completely tuned into the infinite cosmos when he painted that masterpiece, The Transfiguration of Christ, which hangs in the Vatican. This is my absolute number one favorite painting in the world, and always will be. I'm going to get that. I'm going to find it again today. I'm going to post it on Twitter and True Social and Facebook, because I want to always share this all the time with people. And I want to share the music by Mozart, particularly the two great masterpieces, the Requiem and the Grand Mass. And that together, if you listen to that music full blast with good speakers, and you look at that painting, the Transfiguration of Christ, at the same time, obviously they're not contemporaries. Raphael was around 1500. Mozart was around in the midst of the 1700s. So, but still, these three creations, the Transfiguration of Christ painting and the two compositions by Mozart, they are a total energetic match. And they are also a total energetic match with the Orion Nebula and the infinite cosmos. In general, I would say, with infinity, So particularly this one snapshot of the Orion Nebula, and I see this person. There is a person, literally a ghost, a human ghost, but with real legs and hands, but where the hands and the feet fizzle out into a pointy thing, kind of like a ghost does. And I used to make artwork like this. I've made a lot of art pieces that look like this in the past. Somewhere in the 80s, I made these art pieces. I made them out of Fimo, and which is the same as Scopi, and I baked it in the oven and to make it hard, and it has a hole in the head, and I hung it around my neck. And they're about this long, those figures, and the arms fizzle out like this, and the feet too. And a woman in a store comes up to me and says, in Germany, and says, "Oh, those are interesting figures, but they don't have a gender at all. They have no gender." Ha! And it's interesting. Now My brain is like all over the place. My brain's like, oh my god, gender? Yeah, it doesn't have an agenda. My artwork has no agenda. It doesn't have agenda, and it doesn't have an agenda. So very interesting. That's the first time I'm putting these two words together into one box. So there's definitely also a word relation happening there. An etymological word relation is happening there. Definitely. So very interesting. She said that your figures, they don't have a gender. They're totally genderless. They didn't have a penis or vagina. They're just like these ghosts. And that's what I saw in this not the painting. I almost said painting, because it looks like that painting by Raphael. This snapshot of the Orion Nebula there, all the way on the top. It's always happening. These amazing things always happening on the top of the picture. Just like with Raphael's painting. There's this ghost, human ghost, floating horizontally like this. The legs actually pointing up, like on the back. And then this ghost is leaning with total devotion towards an animal in front of him like this. The animal there, very much like my artwork. I paint these situations all the time. Human, animal, kissing, hugging, engulfing, and so on. And this person like this was open arms like this and open face, like I want to kiss you, that kind of face. Happiness, total happiness towards that animal. And that animal also, of course, a ghost formation. And maybe there are two people, two souls, two beings that died and show themselves in that snapshot, in that moment, in that situation, before it fizzles out again and becomes something else, like a cloud. So, but yeah, in that moment, they had this moment together. Here we are, both back at the Orion Nebula. We took our space suits off, both of us, and we find each other, and here you are, I find you. There's my dog that I missed for so long. Here you are, I am there for you. You and I together. Nothing can separate us. This photo is forever. Okay. And I feel very strongly about this. Very strongly about this. Very strongly. But I want to get back to the story. The guy, he was under so much pressure. He could not admit his feelings. He was completely stuck psychologically. This is torment. That is what hell is. Okay. What that man was in for over 2 years. Because of the ego, because of the fear of rejection, because of the shame he was afraid to feel, or something, as if shame is worse than death or something. That's the ego that puts you into a hellish vice. You need to dissolve that shame. You need to completely surrender to the truth, whoever you are. For men, it seems like really Herculean to do this, because of society adds to this, to this momentum of psychological repression and suppression of feelings, of true feelings. You have to ignore society. You have to. Okay, you start with yourself. Okay, you have to. You have no other choice if you want to heal. Every one of us has to do that inwardness process. We have no other choice. Okay, so, but that guy, he was not able to do this, and so at some point he tells his girlfriend, I have to go somewhere, don't come looking for me. He drove over to that lady, Marty is her name, to her house where he was also working for as a contractor, and he was working for her and her mother. And he was driving to her house one early evening, knocking on the door. She opens. Ah, Brian, how are you doing? She knew him well. Come on in. She was alone in the house, and he he said, I need to show you something in your basement. That would already be a red flag for me, but she trusted him. And he said, you go ahead. And she walked ahead of him down the stairs. And as she was almost to the bottom of the basement, he strangled her with his hands. He beat her head and face into the cement, broke her facial bones in several places. Then he took a knife and cut deep into the neck, all the way, like almost half of the neck off. And it scratched onto the aorta. If it had cut into the aorta, she would have died. She barely, by a hair, survived this, which is already, it's an absolute miracle. Most people would not survive this. That means this woman has a real powerful, healthy survival instinct drive in her, survival power, and so will to survive, and love for herself, and healthy immune system. Most people would not survive that. No way. Okay. And she was only in her 40s. She was healthy, strong. She was also had been working out and had muscles. So she was able to survive this unbelievable attack. He left her there for dead. I mean, she was lying in a humongous puddle of blood. Losing that much blood alone would, most organisms would not make it through this. So her co-workers knew something was wrong when she didn't come to work the next day. They immediately mobilized everything. They went to her house. They looked for her. They found her there in the puddle of blood. They called an ambulance, and she was unconscious. I don't know for how long she was in that situation, for a long time. They got her into the emergency room. They did everything they could to stabilize her. They were able to stabilize her. They brought her heart rate back to normal. She was still unconscious for many, many days. I don't know, maybe over a week. But her body stabilized, started to heal. The wounds started to heal. And her mother did. When her mother came to the ER, she could not recognize her because the face was swollen like 10 times the size into a big balloon because of all the injuries and the fractures. And this is a real horror nightmare. I saw the photos. Really horrific. Absolutely horrific. That causes absolute nightmares. And so as soon as she came out of this coma, out of that unconsciousness state, and she started to open up her eyes, and she started to look around her, and people were there seeing that, and Marty, you're coming back to consciousness. I'm so happy. Her daughter was there every day holding her hand. That was very helpful. That's what makes someone survive. Okay, that love bond makes people survive. And the first thing they asked her, who did this to you? And she said, Brian. Okay. And so that's when the police, the investigators, knew for sure. They already had been investigating him, and they already had found a lot of definitely a lot of evidence against him. He had blood stains, and the results came out about the same time when she came into consciousness. the results came out that it was her blood. And so all of that came, all the puzzle pieces fell into their places. And they had the murderer, and then they had the trial, and they were trying to get him as the maximum prison sentence they could possibly get, and understandably so. And he was there and had no emotions at all, completely void of emotions. And he looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. He was scared, really scared. He was like spooked. He was scared for her speaking out against him, and that he was scared that he could not believe it that she survived this, because he thought for sure she was dead. And in the very end, after the verdict was spoken and everything, he got 28 years in prison without parole. And I hope that that stayed like that also, because I mean that's not the ideal situation. People like this should be euthanized. That's my personal view on it. That is not acceptable for anyone to do such violent acts. Violence should not be tolerated. People like this need to be euthanized. But we need to prevent this from happening. There are a lot of people that are running around with cluster B brains, okay, and they are basically taking time bombs. Okay, they can be put into a cluster B facility. They can get therapy there. They will never voluntarily do this. They have to be forced into it. The same with the homeless people. They would rather be out there and take all kinds of drugs and drink alcohol. The cluster A schizoid people, they want their freedom of total lootering and drug use and total dysfunction, and drawing other people into their dysfunction. It's not acceptable. Okay, these people need to be rounded up. They need to be put into a cluster A therapy help center, and it should be these help facilities that I'm thinking about. They need to not be the way we have prisons, or we have any kind of psychiatric ward at this point. That needs to be completely reformed. All of this, I talked about this many times. I will talk about this for the rest of my life, because it's important. Whether we create this during my lifetime or posthum, as Friedrich Nietzsche always said, it doesn't matter. You can, at some point, they need to be created, because it's important. And if humans don't create it, then the AGI robots will, okay, because it needs to be done. And so, and in the very end, she turns around and she looks at Brian and she says, "Brian, why did you do this to me?" And silence, no answer. He sits there with a total disconnected facial expression and no answer. And after that program, I was sitting there and I want to know the answer too. So I talked to the haters. I said, "Why?" And then, of course, my inner voice says, "You know why. You know why he's doing it. You know why he did this." And then the whole thing just came back up into my consciousness, and I was like, okay. He lived with this inner tug of war for over 2 years. That was total hell. Just like Elliot Rodger. Same thing. Elliot Rodger wanted women, girls, so much. And he had this feeling that he could never have one, that he developed this unbelievable hatred for women, to the point where at some point he was at a party. They were standing on a balcony, and he deliberately tried to push several girls off that balcony. And other guys caught him in the nick of time, beat him up. Well, I understand why. Okay, and they threw him at the side of the road and called in an ambulance for him, which is the right thing to do. And well, he wasn't holding it against them. Ultimately, he wrote that in his memoirs. I read his memoirs. Very interesting. He knew he was guilty. He knew that was wrong what he did, but it came out of this unbelievable accumulation of hatred. He knew he couldn't get so he would, and the same with that Brian. He knew he couldn't get her, which is also just an idea in his head. Maybe he could have had her. The only thing he needed to do is ask her if she likes him back. That's all he needed to do. And if she says no, then okay, we can still be friends. But he can't because of the lust, that too. But the main thing is the injury to his pride. Okay, the shame, which is old pain from the past. That's all it is. If we go into it and feel it, then we don't have to act it out anymore on anyone else. That is my approach to therapy, to healing. And that's what I would do for those people in the therapy help centers. Okay. Some people need to be forced to their own healing process, to their own happiness. Okay. And I stand by that. I don't want to see Sodom and Gomorrah happening in the world. I don't want the world to go down into pieces of glass. I care. I care about everyone. I care about every single living being. I care about that Brian too. I feel sorry for that Brian. He was in a tormented mental state. Okay. That's what led up to that rage. Okay. Because he didn't take money, he didn't take her purse, he didn't take jewelry, he didn't steal anything, he didn't even try to rape her. It was rage that was totally occupying his brain. Rage. Same with Elliot Rodger. Okay. Same with that other guy in another story, another guy who had a fixation on a girl. And he took her, he was always playing tennis with her, then he took her to some remote parking lot, and maybe he may have proposed something to her and she rejected him, and then he beat her almost to death. It could have also been the case with that Brian and Marty. He may have even tried to kiss her and she didn't want that, and then he did that. But he could also have done it just out of, he was so in that rage, he wasn't even in the mood to kiss. He was just, I think that's what the case was. Same with Elliot Rodger. And that other guy, I don't know what happened. A lot of times victims like this, they have retrograde amnesia. They can't remember the last half an hour or hour before that incident. Okay, so it gets erased. That memory, some kind of self-protection in the brain. The memory of what led up to this, whatever conversation or situation, and like an hour before that assault took place, and the memory erases that. And for a lot of people, I don't know for all, but that happens a lot. Okay, so in order to protect the brain from that additional psychological trauma, also. But in that other case, that teacher was a student girl, 16-year-old girl. Teacher was in his 20s. He probably tried to kiss her in his car and she refused, and she said, I have a boyfriend, I just want to be friends with you. And I think that's what led him to it. I mean, that I'm just guessing on this, but because she doesn't have a memory of, she doesn't know why he did that to her. So, but it could also be the same as with Elliot Rodger and that Brian. So I don't know, but there are many different scenarios, but they're all very, very similar to each other. And so this can be healed. I believe this. Okay, but the video is long. But in the very end, I want to talk about the story that John Allen told that I watched last night. And that story is about an old lady who had age-related dementia, and her husband had died, like, I don't know, a year before or two, and she was living alone in that in a very big antique mansion. And for some reason, she didn't have anyone helping her. There was nobody there. There was no housekeeper. There was no daughter or son. There was nobody there helping this old woman who just gradually descended into further and further mental decline. And nobody there helping her, looking after her, looking out for her, to making sure that she has food, water, that the thermostat is set high, that the electricity bills are paid, and those kind of things. Very, very important. She didn't have any of that. At some point, she didn't pay the electric bills anymore. Her brain had declined too far. Then the power was turned off to her house. She didn't have the heater on. And she started calling the police at some point. And I don't know whether she called the police before. See, this is where the paranormal thing comes in. So she may have called the police as she was dying. And when they got to the house, they found her already deceased. And then they found out that there were more phone calls from her right after rigor mortis set in, which is cell death. They did an examination of the body. They found out the forensic examiners talked to each other, and they found out that she made more frantic phone calls to the police, always calling for her husband John. John, where are you? I need you to come here. I need you to help me. I need you to turn the thermostat up. I am cold. And there were more phone calls. One was apparently before she died. Why she did this actually, and with her hand, calling the police while she was still alive. And then the next one, the phone calls after that, with the same voice, the same frantic calling for her husband John, after she had died. So, and they could not understand. I mean, if this was a prank caller, the prank caller would have had to be there and seen this entire sequence happening, right? And would have had to be right there at the spot to know now she's dead and now I'm calling the police and doing a prank call. But obviously there was nobody there. There was nobody there who would do this. Okay. And there was nobody else there in the house with her. It was only her. And several phone calls followed that, where they could absolutely determine that these phone calls were made at the time after the rigor mortis had set in, which they can pinpoint the time, the exact time of someone's cell death. Okay? They know this from studying the brain and from the what happens to the cells and so on in this process. So they were very puzzled about this. And then for one whole year after the lady died, she would keep on calling the police with the same frantic, and there was not a recorded message. These frantic calls were all slightly a little bit different. Always calling, John, where are you? John, I need you to come here. Please help me. I am dying. Please help me. The thermostat needs to be turned up. Yeah. She kept on calling. I don't know, like several times per week. She kept on calling the police. Always the same. And they would always go back to her house because they would think there must be someone there that is using her phone. At some point, the phone line was disconnected, had been disconnected because the house was empty now and nobody wanted to buy the house. Also, everyone was absolutely spooked out by this entire situation. It became a haunted house, and the phone calls still happened, even though the landline was cut off and all of that. And then at some point, the house was set on fire and burned down all the way to the ground. The phone calls still kept coming to the police for 1 whole year. And at some point, after 1 year, it finally stopped, ended. No more phone calls. So now, this is very paranormal, of course, and there are a lot of people talking about this case on YouTube under that video. I knew that a lot of people would be talking about this, and I chimed in with my 3 cents. And interesting, those are all women that are talking about, all middle-aged women that are talking about this. Because obviously that also triggers our own fear, of what might happen to us. Time is ticking, obviously, yeah. Depending on how old we all are, we have so and so many more years, and then what if this or that scenario happens, and what if we, and all of these women, they're like this poor woman. She must have died in absolute, total desolation and agony from hypothermia, from thirst and hunger. Couldn't even get out of bed anymore. So nobody there to help her. That must have been an absolute horrific death. Not just the physical aspect of it, but also the psychological aspect of it. So all of these women feel very, very empathetic for that woman, and I'm glad to see all of this empathy. Okay? I'm glad to see there's an accumulation of empathetic people, of empaths that are commenting under that video. And most of these women, including myself, are on board with the paranormal and accept that she could not let go. Her soul was still in this frantic drive, fight or flight. That's still the ego, but not in a mean way, but in a frantic way for herself. It just reflects on the agony that she must have been in when she was dying. Okay, and nobody should have to ever die like this. This is absolute horror. That's absolute violence, and that's absolutely unacceptable. That should never happen to anyone. Okay, every old person needs to have someone to look after them, to provide for them, to make sure that they have a caregiver that protects them and that makes these last moments or years of their lives pleasant. Okay? Everyone deserves that. Okay? And if someone says they don't want to live anymore, people need to grant that person this wish. Okay? I think that's very important. That if someone says, I absolutely don't want to live anymore, this is not livable anymore. Or when my mother said that several times to my brother, when someone says that, I don't want to go crazy, I don't want this, don't want to experience this decline or whatever, I don't want to. For my mother, it's fear of shame. That's the ego, very strong ego thing. But whatever causes them to say, I don't want to live anymore, that should be respected. Okay, we need to have assisted death. It's very, 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 very important. Okay? That's the ethical thing to handle something. Okay, but it's up to the person to request that, and to request it several times, okay, and insist on it, that we give that person what that person wants. Okay, it's very important. Okay, and also in a stage like my mother, marijuana and other mildly hallucinogenic substances, whole plant substances, are very helpful, even if it's synthetic in that stage. But that's not good for the environment to use any kind of synthetic drugs. So I always recommend natural whole plant substance, marijuana, cannabis, Pieris japonica, oleander, those kind of things, to make it more pleasant for the last hours or weeks or months of that person's life. Okay, if that's administered every day to make them feel better, to make them get acquainted with the afterlife, with what's going to come, the Orion Nebula and beyond. Okay, that this is not scary, this is wonderful. People who have transitioned to the other side but came back talked about this in depth. Okay, they said this is not frightening, they're not afraid of death anymore now. Okay, so it's very important. This is very important to consider. Okay, that we protect all living beings from agony, and that we make it nice, and that we make it pleasant for every living being, and every soul can heal. Okay, take care.